Birmingham's most conservative priest had viewed heavy metal music as the devil's work for 30 years. Every Sunday in his sermons, he would curse Ozzy Osbourne. Until that cold winter night, while weeping in the church garden, he encountered Ozzy. What happened that night would change not only two men's perspectives, but all of Birmingham's views on metal music and prejudice. Because the priest had no idea that the lesson he would learn from Ozzy would transform his life forever. In December 1985, snow was falling on the streets of Birmingham. Ozzy Osbourne was heading home from recording sessions for his Shot in the Dark album when he spotted an elderly man sitting in St. Mary's church garden, sobbing uncontrollably. The man was holding a photograph of his son, looking as if the entire world had collapsed upon him. Ozzy normally wouldn't interfere in such situations, but that night, something inside urged him toward the stranger. Truth was, Ozzy himself felt terrible leaving the studio that evening. He'd argued with his producer during the Shot in the Dark recordings, had a fight with Sharon over the phone, and once again felt the urge to turn to drink. But he didn't. As the cold air hit his face, he thought about his own dark periods. Perhaps that's why he recognized the crying man's pain. His own past moments of helplessness had led him to walk toward this stranger. "Are you all right, Father?" Ozzy asked gently. When Father Thomas Mackenzie looked up and saw Ozzy's face under the streetlight, he froze. His heart began racing. This was the man he'd been calling the poisoner of youth in his sermons for years, the one he'd described as Satan's representative in Birmingham, Ozzy Osbourne. You're that Osbourne, the one who makes that cursed music," he said, trembling. Ozzy was used to this reaction. He'd faced the same accusations thousands of times, but the pain in the old man's eyes was stronger than his anger. "Yes, I'm Ozzy," he said calmly. "But right now, I'm just a neighbor wanting to help a cold, sad man." Father Thomas was 62 years old and had been serving at St. Mary's Church for 30 years. He was a conservative, disciplined man with strict principles. He viewed heavy metal music, especially Ozzy's music since the Black Sabbath era, as demonic tools that led young people astray. Every week in his sermons, he would speak about this topic, warning parents to keep their children away from such music. Father Thomas's stance had very deep roots. When he came to Birmingham as a young seminarian in the 1970s, the city was in the midst of industrial collapse. Drug use among youth was increasing, crime rates were rising. He had seen Black Sabbath's emergence as part of this social decay. While thinking, "This music is poisoning young souls," he was actually experiencing fear of social change. Over the years, this fear had hardened into rigid prejudice, but his tears that night had a much more personal reason. "My son Michael is in the hospital," he said through his tears. "Drug overdose. He's 19, my only child." His voice trembled as he held a photograph of Michael taken when he was little. Ozzy sat down beside Father Thomas. On the cold concrete bench, snowflakes settled on both their shoulders. "Father, I was once a lost soul too," he began. "I struggled with drugs, alcohol, every kind of evil. I still struggle with it, actually. But my music didn't lead me to evil. Quite the opposite. It helped me heal." Father Thomas was surprised by these words. Before him wasn't the demonic figure he expected, but a human being who understood and had experienced his own pain. "But your songs, Iron Man, Paranoid, they negatively influence young people," he said, still defensive. "Iron Man actually tells of war's horror, Father," Ozzy said patiently. "How a man returns from war traumatized, how he's ostracized by society. Paranoid deals with the struggle against mental illness. I can write these songs because I've lived them." For the first time in his life, Father Thomas began hearing these songs from a different perspective. "Do you have children too?" he asked. "I have 3 children, Kelly, Jack, and Amy," Ozzy said, his eyes welling up. "They are the most precious beings in the world to me. Jack also used drugs for a period. I've lived those terrible nights, those hospital corridors too. That night they talked for hours about heavy metal music concerns and life. Ozzy listened patiently and explained. He told how War Pigs was actually an anti-war protest song, how he wrote Children of the Grave because he worried about future generations. I'm not a Satan worshipper, Father. On the contrary, I try to understand souls lost in darkness, because I know what that darkness means, he said sincerely. As Ozzy left that night, Father Thomas watched him go. Everything he knew about this man came from exaggerated media stories, biting bats, stage antics, scandals. But the person he met tonight resembled none of these. Looking at Michael's photograph in his hand, he asked himself, "Do I not know my own son either?" Perhaps because he hadn't listened for years, Michael too had sought understanding elsewhere. This thought made him shudder. That night, Father Thomas returned home with his mind in turmoil. His 30-year-old beliefs had been shaken. The next morning he went to the hospital. His son Michael had been moved from intensive care to a regular room. "Michael, we need to talk about some important things," his father said, taking his hand. "Last night I met Ozzy Osbourne." Michael's eyes widened like saucers. "Dad, you met Ozzy? And you're still alive?" he joked weakly. Father Thomas told his son about that night. How Ozzy was as a father, how he poured his pain into music, how he had shown him understanding. "Son, perhaps I've been wrong for years. Maybe you turned to other paths, not because of music, but because you couldn't talk to me," said Father Thomas. This confession deeply affected Michael. For years he had felt lonely at home due to his father's rigid attitude, thinking he wasn't understood. "Dad, I just wanted to be your pride, but no matter what I did, I always felt like I was never enough," Michael said through tears. This conversation melted years of accumulated ice between father and son. The week they spent in the hospital completely changed their communication. A few months later, when Michael had recovered and returned home, Father Thomas made a bold decision. He would go to Ozzy's concert in Birmingham. "Dad, are you sure? You'll be the first priest to go to a metal concert?" Michael said with concern, but smiling. "Perhaps that's how it should be," his father replied. His heart was racing as he went to the concert. He waited backstage for Ozzy. The security guards were surprised when they recognized him. "Father Thomas, it takes great courage for you to come here," Ozzy said, with a genuine smile when he saw him. "I wanted to listen to you, to your music. Perhaps there's something I've been missing for 30 years, the priest said shyly. That night, when Ozzy took the stage, Father Thomas stood at the edge of the stage. When he heard, "Mama, I'm coming home," he couldn't hold back his tears. There was nothing demonic in this song, only the longing of a man wanting to return home to his family. During Shot in the Dark, he heard the inner cry of a soul battling depression. Close My Eyes Forever dealt with the fear of losing loved ones. Each song was a different aspect of a person's inner world. As the concert continued, Father Thomas began observing the fans around him. Instead of the crazy, dangerous crowd he expected, there were people of all ages. An elderly couple, young parents, even a disabled youth in a wheelchair. They all experienced different emotions with each of Ozzy's songs. Some were crying, some were smiling. "These are just like my congregation members," he thought. "They're just experiencing the same human emotions in a different place, in a different way." After the concert, they had tea together. Ozzy told the story behind each of his songs. He explained how Dreamer was full of hope, how See You on the Other Side actually expressed the desire to reunite with loved ones. "My music is dark because life has dark sides too, Father. But my purpose is to shed light on this darkness, to make people feel they're not alone," he said. As Father Thomas went home that night, he felt his 30-year-old thoughts had completely changed. The following Sunday, he said words in his sermon that would shock the congregation. "Brothers and sisters, God wants us to understand, not to judge. I learned an important lesson this week. As months passed, these two opposite men became close friends. When Ozzy went on tours, he would send postcards to Father Thomas, and the priest would include Ozzy in his prayers. Father Thomas began closely following Ozzy's charitable work. He learned that he regularly visited children's hospitals, organized fundraising events for cancer patients, and spoke with young people about drug addiction. This man is doing what I've been trying to do for 30 years, but through music, he thought. Ozzy, meanwhile, was learning patience and compassion from Father Thomas. In the summer of 1987, when Michael had fully recovered, his father wanted to introduce him to Ozzy. "This man didn't judge me in my darkest hour, and he'll show you understanding too," he said. Michael was initially hesitant, but when he met Ozzy, he saw what an ordinary, compassionate person he was. "Meeting the creator of the music I listen to is surreal," Michael said. "I won't feel guilty listening to my music anymore," he added with a smile. His father's approving look made him happy. This family had begun to unite through understanding rather than conflict over music. Father Thomas began speaking about different forms of music and art in his sermons. "God reveals himself in different ways," he would say. "Sometimes in a hymn, sometimes in a rock song." This change hadn't been easy. In the first weeks, some elderly congregation members had criticized Father Thomas. "You've changed, Father. These musics are still dangerous," they had said. But Thomas patiently listened to each one and shared his own experience. "I judged for 30 years, but never tried to understand," he would say. Gradually, young families began coming to the church. Even Michael's friends sometimes attended services and chatted with Father Thomas. The church had become a meeting place for all generations, not just the elderly. Ozzy, influenced by Father Thomas, began incorporating spiritual themes more strongly into his music. Songs like "Miracle Man" and "I Don't Want to Change the World" were works inspired by this friendship. In 1991, when Sharon was diagnosed with cancer, Father Thomas provided spiritual support to the family. He would visit the hospital every week and chat with Sharon. "God strengthens you through trials, Ozzy," he would say. "That's what my music does too, creating beauty from pain," Ozzy would reply. Both were experiencing that life could be cruel, but love and friendship could change everything. This difficult period strengthened their bond even more. As their friendship deepened, it became a story talked about throughout Birmingham. People spoke of Thomas going to Ozzy's metal concert in priest's clothing, of the two making hospital visits together. The local newspaper had even featured this unusual friendship on the front page. "Metal legend and priest's friendship changes the city." Father Thomas now used Ozzy as an example in his sermons, speaking about the power of understanding instead of judging. Ozzy would arrange his tour schedule to visit Father Thomas whenever he came to Birmingham, never forgetting his friend. No one in the city judged music or people the way they used to anymore. In 2003, when Father Thomas fell ill, Ozzy visited him every day. "Bring me your music, I want to listen one last time," the elderly priest said. Ozzy had brought his acoustic guitar and sang "Dreamer." "I can't see anything demonic in this song either," Thomas smiled. "Because the real devil isn't in music, it's in the hatred in people's hearts," Ozzy replied. At the funeral service, Ozzy sang "Amazing Grace" beside his friend's coffin. The congregation was initially surprised, then listened through tears. This metal legend, while bidding farewell to his dear friend's soul, once again proved that music is a universal language. After his father's funeral, Michael told Ozzy, "My father became a completely different person after that night he met you. He began to understand both me and music better." This friendship story would be told for generations in Birmingham, remembered as the finest example of how prejudices can be broken.